My name is Elena Morales. I'm 41 years old, and on a humid Thursday afternoon in Charleston, South Carolina, I watched my marriage evaporate through the glass doors of a yacht club. But it didn't begin there. It began with a cancellation email. I was supposed to be in a board meeting at 2 o'clock that day. As CFO of a mid-sized logistics company near the port, my calendar is usually carved in stone. Quarterly forecasts, freight projections, fuel cost modeling, numbers are predictable. Risk can be measured. I've built a career on anticipating problems before they happen. I don't miss details. Except, apparently, I missed this one. At 10:12 a.m., my assistant forwarded a message. The CEO had tested positive for the flu. The board meeting was postponed. 3 hours of my afternoon suddenly opened up like a blank line item on a spreadsheet. I stared at my calendar for a moment, unsure what to do with unexpected freedom. It had been years since I'd had unstructured time in the middle of a workday. Instead of going back to my office to clear emails, I did something impulsive. I grabbed my car keys and drove toward the marina. The air that day was thick with late summer humidity, the kind that makes Charleston feel suspended between sea and sky. I told myself I deserved a quiet lunch by the water. Something simple. Something peaceful. Grant thought I'd be buried in quarterly reports until at least 6. At noon, he texted, "Long day. Don't wait up." I remember glancing at the message at a red light, feeling a small, familiar tug of distance I had been ignoring for months. I typed back, "Good luck," and tossed my phone onto the passenger seat. I parked near Harbor Light Yacht Club and ordered shrimp tacos from the Dockside Cafe. The scent of saltwater and sunscreen drifted through the air. Sailboats rocked lazily in their slips. It felt like the kind of afternoon that belonged in someone else's life, a slower one. That's when I saw her. Not him. Her. She was standing on the upper deck of a sleek 38-foot Sea Ray, sunlight catching in her dark hair. She couldn't have been older than 32. She wore a white linen dress that moved effortlessly in the breeze, the fabric skimming her knees as if she'd stepped out of a coastal lifestyle magazine. In her hand was a champagne flute. She laughed at something someone below said, her head tipping back in a way that was unguarded, intimate. And then Grant stepped into view behind her. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look around nervously. He moved toward her with the comfort of habit, wrapping his arms around her waist like it was muscle memory. Like he had done it 100 times before. I didn't gasp. I didn't drop my tray. My body went very still. I observed. The yacht wasn't ours. We didn't own a boat. Grant had always insisted boats were financial sinkholes, impractical luxuries for people who didn't understand depreciation schedules. I had agreed. It made sense at the time. Yet there he was, barefoot on polished teak decking, opening a cooler stocked with Dom Perignon, the same champagne he once told me was an irresponsible indulgence. He poured her another glass, brushing his fingers against hers deliberately. Then I saw the detail that shifted suspicion into certainty. Grant stepped down onto the dock and handed the bartender a sleek black credit card. Mine. The Platinum Reserve card issued in my name, the one I had added Grant to years ago for flexibility. I recognized the metallic sheen, the minimalist design. I paid that bill every month. I had memorized the last 4 digits. The bartender swiped it. Grant signed without hesitation. The ease of it. That's what stunned me most. There was no secrecy in his posture, no urgency, just entitlement. I stood there long enough to see her lean forward and kiss him. Not tentative, not confused, familiar. That was the moment something inside me recalibrated. Not shattered, not exploded, recalibrated. I turned around and walked back to my car. My shrimp tacos sat untouched on the table behind me. The marina sounds, boat engines humming, halyards tapping against masts, blurred into a dull background noise. I drove home with the air conditioning blasting, my hands steady on the steering wheel. The numbers didn't make sense yet, but I already knew they would. That night, Grant came home just after 7, faintly sunburned and smelling like salt water and citrus cologne. He loosened his tie as he walked into the kitchen, as if he'd just survived a brutal day of negotiations instead of an afternoon on a yacht. "Tough meetings," he said, dropping his keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. I looked up from the stove. I bet. If he heard the edge in my voice, he didn't show it. He grabbed a beer, asked what was for dinner, and sat down at the island, scrolling through his phone while I plated the salmon. I watched him from across the counter, memorizing the ordinary rhythm of his movements. The way he cut his food, the way he checked his messages between bites, the way he avoided eye contact just slightly longer than necessary. At 11:42 p.m., after he retreated to the guest bedroom, claiming again that my restless tossing kept him awake, I opened my laptop. For 18 months, I had treated our credit card statement like a summary report. I verified the total, confirmed no obvious fraud alerts, and paid it. I trusted the line items to represent business lunches, fuel, client entertainment. I trusted him. That night, I didn't look at the total. I looked at everything. The Harbor Light Yacht Club membership fee hit me first, $18,750. I blinked and refreshed the screen as if the system might correct itself. It didn't. Below that were monthly docking fees, $1,200, consistent and neat, like rent. Coastal Marine Financing, $2,430 per month. I felt something cold settle into my chest. Riverside Lofts, $3,100 monthly rent. Savannah Fine Jewelers, $9,460. Recurring transfers to M. Bennett, $2,000 every month. The dates stretch back 16 months. Quiet, regular, systematic. I opened a spreadsheet. If betrayal had to exist, I would at least quantify it. Line by line, I entered every charge tied to the yacht club, the marina, the apartment complex, the jewelry store, and the recurring transfers. I categorized them, summed them, cross-referenced billing cycles. The total stared back at me, $112,394. I recalculated 3 times. There's a particular kind of nausea that comes from numbers you can't argue with. If he had lied about a dinner, I could rationalize it. If he had bought one reckless gift, I could label it a lapse in judgment. But this was infrastructure. He hadn't slipped. He had constructed. The yacht registration took me 15 minutes to trace. Public maritime records are surprisingly transparent if you know how to search them. The vessel was registered under an LLC, Bennett Coastal Holdings. Bennett, the same last name listed in the recurring transfers. At 1:17 a.m., I found her. Marissa Bennett, 32, boutique marketing consultant, 3,800 Instagram followers, and a curated feed full of filtered sunsets and captions about building your dream life. There were photos of champagne glasses raised against harbor skylines, photos of a modern loft apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and pale oak floors, photos taken from a balcony that overlooked the Ashley River, a balcony I was paying for. I clicked through image after image, recognizing pieces of my financial statements disguised as aesthetics. Then I saw the photo that made my hand tremble. Marissa sitting in the driver's seat of a luxury SUV, one arm draped casually over the steering wheel. The caption read, "Grateful for the journey." On her wrist was a watch I would recognize in the dark, my mother's vintage Rolex. Grant had told me it was stolen during a conference in Atlanta last year. He'd seemed upset at the time, apologetic. He'd even filed a police report. Apparently it hadn't been stolen. It had been reassigned. I closed my eyes and inhaled slowly, counting to 4 the way I do before presenting bad news to a board. Here's what betrayal really feels like. Not screaming, not cinematic heartbreak. It feels procedural. It feels like reconciling an account and discovering an unbalanced ledger that's been off for months. The numbers don't lie. People do. By the time I shut my laptop at 2:06 a.m., I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't crying. I was calculating. If he had spent 16 months building a second life on my financial foundation, then I needed to understand every beam, every column, every weakness. Because if he built it on my credit, he built it on leverage I could withdraw. For 10 days, I lived in 2 parallel realities. In one, I was Elena Morales, CFO, composed and precise. I attended executive briefings, renegotiated vendor contracts, and signed off on a multi-million-dollar freight expansion without anyone suspecting that my personal life had imploded. I wore navy suits, neutral lipstick, and the expression of a woman fully in control. In the other reality, I was building a case against my own husband. I didn't confront Grant. Confrontation is emotional. Emotion creates noise. Noise destroys leverage. Instead, I documented. Every night after he retreated to the guest bedroom with his phone and whatever version of himself he presented to her, I opened my laptop and continued tracing the architecture of his second life. I pulled public business filings for Bennett Coastal Holdings. Grant was listed as managing partner. The registered address? A UPS mailbox downtown. The yacht loan required income verification? Mine. The LOFT lease listed Grant as guarantor, but the financial backing attached to the application referenced my salary and our joint assets. He had leveraged my creditworthiness to qualify for a lifestyle designed to exclude me. That wasn't just betrayal. It was strategic exploitation. On the fourth night, I accessed his synced iPad. We had once set up shared cloud storage for convenience. Neither of us had bothered to disable it. Convenience can be ruthless. The messages went back 8 months. When are you finally leaving her? Soon, after Q3. She won't see it coming. I read that sentence 3 times. She won't see it coming. I don't want to hide anymore. You won't have to, I promise. There were screenshots of engagement rings, oval diamonds, minimalist bands. He had circled one in red. There were discussions about timing, about how the house situation would need to be handled carefully, about listing it in the spring when the market was stronger. Our house. Meaning mine. They weren't improvising. They were planning. The rage didn't arrive the way I expected it to. It came quietly, like a steady current under the surface. I felt less like a betrayed wife and more like a forensic auditor uncovering a long-running internal fraud scheme. By day 10, I knew exactly what I needed. An attorney. Clara Jennings had been recommended to me years ago by a colleague, 55, surgical in her arguments, known for dismantling high-asset divorce cases with unnerving calm. I scheduled the consultation under the guise of estate planning. Her office overlooked the Cooper River. When I laid the documentation across her conference table, statements, screenshots, LLC filings, she didn't react with shock. She reacted with interest. You control the liquidity, she said after 15 minutes of silence. That means you control the timeline. It was the first time since the marina that I felt something like power return to my bloodstream. But Clara held up a finger. If you freeze him out abruptly, she continued, he can argue financial coercion. You need separation before action, preparation before disruption. So we built a plan. I opened a new personal checking account at a bank Grant had never used. I redirected my direct deposit through HR under the pretense of consolidating savings. I applied for an independent credit line in my own name and locked down my credit report. Every move was quiet. Every move was legal. I commissioned a forensic accounting review to quantify the misuse of marital funds. Clara prepared draft divorce documents but did not file them. Not yet. Timing mattered. I waited for my annual performance review to finalize. I had been up for a bonus tied to cost-saving initiatives. If I was going to destabilize my marriage, I wanted my professional footing to be unshakable. The bonus came through. 18%. That same night, I chose the date, September 14th, Marissa's birthday. I had seen the message Grant sent her. I'm taking you sailing. Big surprise planned. I imagined the yacht, the champagne, the ring. He thought he was preparing to step into a new life. He didn't realize the foundation of that life still ran through me. For the remaining days, I perfected normalcy. I asked about his meetings. I made dinner. I listened when he complained about fuel prices and difficult clients. I even laughed at one of his stories. He never once asked if something was wrong. Not once. Because he was already living elsewhere. What he didn't understand was that I was too, and unlike him, I had a ledger and a deadline. September 14th arrived humid and bright, the kind of Charleston afternoon where the air feels thick enough to hold secrets. Grant left the house at 10 a.m., dressed in linen and optimism. He kissed my cheek lightly, distracted, already halfway somewhere else. Big client meeting, he said. Good luck, I replied. By 2:30 p.m., I was seated in my home office overlooking the marsh, blinds half drawn against the glare. On my desk were 3 things: my phone, Clara's finalized divorce filing, and a folder containing the forensic accounting summary. I took one steady breath and dialed the card issuer. After verifying my identity, I said calmly, I need to remove the authorized user from my Platinum account, immediately. It will deactivate the card ending in 93-1, the representative confirmed. Yes, I said, that's correct. There was a brief pause, a soft clicking of keys. Done. The authorized user has been removed effective immediately. 2:32 p.m. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on my desk. Somewhere in Charleston Harbor, Grant was likely raising a glass of champagne. Somewhere on polished teak decking, Marissa was probably smiling up at him, expecting a ring. I imagined him handing over the card, confident, rehearsed, the swipe, the decline, the second attempt, the tight smile fading, the quiet humiliation when customer service explained that the primary account holder had revoked access, but I didn't need to witness it, because that wasn't the real collapse. At 2:47 p.m., Clara electronically filed the divorce petition. At 3:02 p.m., the civil complaint for financial fraud was submitted, outlining the misuse of marital credit and income verification under false pretenses. And just like that, step 2 began. The yacht loan, flagged due to pending litigation, was frozen within days. Coastal marine financing does not appreciate disputed income verification. The bank launched an internal review. Without continued payments, repossession proceedings initiated automatically. The LLC, Bennett Coastal Holdings, was subpoenaed for financial documentation. It turned out the managing partner had been operating with significantly less independent capital than implied. The loft lease at Riverside Lofts unraveled quickly. Once my income was formally separated and guarantor liability challenged, the property management company required immediate proof of independent qualification. Marissa did not have it. Within 3 weeks, the dominoes fell exactly as projected. The yacht was seized from its slip one quiet Tuesday morning. I received confirmation through Clara before Grant did. The loft posted a formal eviction notice after non-payment, and the Rolex, my mother's Rolex, arrived at Clara's office in a padded envelope with no return address and no note, just the watch, wrapped in tissue paper like something returned to a store. Grant called that evening. I let it ring. He texted, "We need to talk." I did not respond. He called again. When I finally answered, it was not from our house. I had already packed a suitcase and moved temporarily into a short-term rental arranged quietly 2 days earlier. "Elena," he said, his voice breaking in a way I had never heard before. "This isn't what it looks like." I almost admired the reflex. "It looks exactly like what it is," I said evenly. He cried. Actually cried. Said he'd made a mistake. Said he felt lost. Said he hadn't meant for it to go this far. I listened without interrupting. When he finally stopped speaking, I said, "You built an entire life using my financial identity. That's not confusion, that's calculation." There was silence, then anger, accusations about control, about how I always managed everything, how he felt small. It was almost impressive how quickly regret shifted to blame. "I managed the numbers," I replied calmly. "You managed the lies." The next day, he retained an attorney. Within a week, he understood that contesting the fraud claim would open doors he could not afford to have opened, professionally or personally. He signed. No dramatic courtroom battle, no public spectacle, just signatures on clean white paper. Marissa's Instagram went private within a month. The yacht photos vanished. The champagne sunsets disappeared. The curated narrative dissolved under the weight of unpaid invoices. Grant moved into a furnished corporate rental off I-26. A one-bedroom unit with neutral carpeting and leased furniture that smelled faintly of detergent. The fantasy had not survived liquidity removal. It had never been self-sustaining. And that was the part that mattered most. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. He thought he was constructing a dream. He forgot he had borrowed the foundation. The divorce finalized in 5 months. No courtroom theatrics. No drawn-out asset battles. Just signatures, structured settlements, and the quiet efficiency of a system that prefers clean math over emotional mess. Grant agreed not to contest the fraud claim in exchange for discretion. The yacht was gone. The LLC dissolved. The apartment lease terminated. The Rolex sat back in my jewelry drawer, ticking steadily as if it had never left. I kept the house. I kept my equity. And for the first time in years, I kept my entire paycheck. The silence in the house after everything settled was different from the silence before. Before it had been heavy, like something unspoken pressing against the walls. Now it felt open, neutral, possibility instead of tension. I repainted the bedroom a deep coastal blue. Grant had always preferred beige. "Resale value," he'd said. I chose the blue because it made me feel like I was standing at the edge of the ocean. I replaced the mattress, bought new sheets, rearranged the furniture. It wasn't about erasing him. It was about recentering myself. At work, my annual review had already secured my bonus. 2 months later, I transitioned into a hybrid consulting structure with the company. Fewer internal meetings, more strategic oversight, higher hourly leverage. I hadn't realized how much mental energy I had been spending managing a man who resented my success while benefiting from it. Without that drain, I was sharper, clearer, lighter. There were moments, of course. Mornings when I reached for my phone to share something small and remembered there was no one on the other end who belonged there. Evenings when the house felt too large. But grief wasn't the dominant emotion. Relief was. Relief that I no longer had to pretend not to notice the distance. Relief that I wasn't subsidizing someone else's curated happiness. Relief that the numbers finally aligned with reality. In July, I booked a solo trip to Costa Rica. Grant hated humidity, said it made him irritable. I chose a beachfront hotel with open-air balconies and no agenda. I spent mornings reading under palm trees and afternoons walking along the shoreline, letting salt water soak into skin that had been too tightly held for too long. One evening, I signed up for a sailing lesson, not on a yacht someone else financed. On a small training sailboat with an instructor who introduced himself plainly and asked no unnecessary questions. He showed me how to read the wind, how to adjust the lines, how to shift weight when the boat leaned too far. "Don't fight the wind," he said. "Work with it." I smiled at that. Control doesn't mean rigidity. It means understanding leverage. Back in Charleston, I kept taking lessons. Saturday mornings became mine. The marina no longer felt like the site of a collapse. It felt neutral. Water doesn't hold grudges. Once I saw a sea ray similar to the one Grant had used. It passed by without significance. That's how I knew I was healing. I didn't check Marissa's Instagram again. I didn't ask about Grant through mutual acquaintances. Charleston is small. Information circulates if you want it to. I didn't. The only update I received came indirectly. Grant had shifted into smaller appraisal contracts. Fewer corporate clients, more residential jobs. Reputation is currency in this city, and liquidity matters. Some mornings I sit in my backyard with coffee just after sunrise. The marsh glows gold, birds move between reeds, the air smells clean. I think about that canceled board meeting, about shrimp tacos, about the moment I looked up. If that meeting hadn't been postponed, I might still be reconciling statements without reading the line items. I might still be paying for a narrative that excluded me. Instead, I learned something most people don't realize until it's too late. Money doesn't just buy comfort. It reveals character. And control isn't about domination. It's about awareness. Grant believed he was building a dream, a yacht, a loft, a new beginning. But he misunderstood the most basic principle of structure. If you don't own the foundation, you don't own the future. When I withdrew my support, the structure didn't just weaken. It collapsed. Not because I destroyed it, but because it was never self-sustaining to begin with. Now, when I check my accounts, they balance. When I look at my life, it balances too. And this time, every asset in it is truly mine. Life has a funny way of exposing what we ignore. So read the statements, trust your instincts, and never fund a fantasy you're not living in. Protect your peace, protect your credit, and remember, leverage isn't revenge, it's wisdom. If this story made you think, smile, or double-check your online banking, subscribe to Revenge Protocol and drop a comment below. We love receipts, and we definitely read them all.